a gift. That would be such a beautiful gift. So we're on record at this
Yep,
moment.
we're
Good.
recording.
Well, it is my joy to welcome you to the sixth session in the
Wow.
75th anniversary series. And the ICEC organization, Illinois Council for Exceptional Children, has been around for 75 years. That is truly a great, great, great accomplishment.
Mhm.
And it's a lovely marker for our organization. Um, and we have this wonderful series on the 15th day of each month. And this month, we are taking time to think of a tremendously powerful um, topic, as far as I'm concerned. And it's about the value of parent involvement. And I so appreciate the word value, the value of parent involvement. When leaders collaborate, the value of parent involvement. And we have Dr. Jamila Gilbert with us, and we also, Dr. Gloria McDaniel Hall had another engagement, and I think Dr. Gilbert has the full scope of this, if that's correct.
It's correct. It's
Ex-
correct.
Excellent. Let me just, for the record, and for those viewers that might be viewing this later, Dr. Gilbert was born in the Chicago area, in a suburb of Chicago, and she has a very interesting educational experience in her time in Chicago, a wonderful record of learning and growing as a young student. She came to Illinois State University in 1991, and obviously loved Central Illinois enough to stay 31 years, which is wonderful for us here at ISU to have Dr. Gilbert with us through her BA degree, through her master's degree, and through her doctoral studies. She also taught and taught in every district and university around. Her major passion is the field of children with emotional and behavioral disorders. And it is my privilege to introduce her to you today. I had the good fortune of knowing Jamila from the very beginning when she arrived first to the university, and she has been a star ever since, and she continues as a professor at National Louis University in Chicago, and her students there are privileged to work with her and learn from her and know her through all her experiences and her wisdom, age, and grace through life thus far. And she has many more years of good work ahead of her. And so this morning, we will greatly anticipate with joy when leaders collaborate, the value of parental involvement. So
Thank
on
you.
you go, Jamila. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
I am in a small little room in the lower level of the Airy Crown Theater because I am volunteering for National Louis's commencement ceremony, and commencement is today, this morning. So, um, I hopefully will not get kicked out of here, but I have been able to sneak away to talk to you all. I want to first just address the elephant in the room. We are all educators here. We already know the power of parental involvement. We already know that. So, over the next like 30 minutes or so, I want to make sure that I assure you I am not going to waste your time telling you something that you already know, that you've already experienced, and you could probably teach and present this yourself. But what the difference is what I want us to talk about and to grow forward in with intentionality is this concept moving away from parental involvement. So Dr. Gloria McDaniel Hall and I, who also is a professor at National Louis University, we we want to challenge the title parental involvement. And what do you think that we're going to challenge it instead of parental involvement? What do you think that we are going to challenge and say what we're needing more today in our schools is not so much parental involvement, but what would you say?
Parental
Having to do with that.
connection.
What did you say?
Parental connection.
Parental connection. I love that. What else would you say? Think about the difference between involvement and connection. What else would you say? Engagement. Thank you, Karen.
Collaboration.
Collaboration. Oh my gosh, y'all are, yeah, you are in my notes. You're in my notes. Yes, I'm going to talk to you all. We are actually going to talk together. I want to um, talk about the power of family, engaging families, not just parents, but engaging family members, but not just engaging them, but understanding that there is greater power when we consider them as leaders. Okay. I need permission to share my screen though. So whoever is host, co-host,
Oh,
can you please
my
give me
joy.
that?
Thank you so much. Sorry. I know. Hold on. I'm doing the wrong little. No, go for it, Jamila.
That's all right. All right, go for it. Woohoo. All right. Okay. So a little bit about me. I'm going to call you family because we're, as teachers, I feel like we are all family. um, I like to laugh, and I feel like life is so short and it's so tough at the same time. My goodness. And we never know what's going on and what people are dealing with. And because of those truths, um, let's not take everything so seriously, but let's seriously live with intentionality. So if that makes sense, that taking not taking everything so seriously, but commit to living with intentionality. And with that, that gives us the freedom um, to give grace to ourselves and to others. And this, I'm sharing this with you because that's how my philosophy on living and also teaching. So we're going to talk about when leaders collaborate, the power of family engagement. The first thing I would love is for us to talk about what we consider when we think about titles of educational leaders. And you all will probably know where I'm going at from here. But when you think about, don't just drop it in the chat. You can unmute and let's talk. It's a few of us here. When we think about, I say, hey, I want you all to name the top two educational leaders. What titles or roles would you say? I'd say principal. What would you say?
Superintendent.
You'd say who? You can drop it in the chat if you would like to, or you could just say it out loud.
Superintendent.
Superintendent, that's another one. Anyone else? Educational leader, educators. Come on, y'all. You know how it is when the class is all quiet. Come on now. Those are the only two. When you don't even think of teachers. We are teachers and we haven't even put ourselves out there. How is that? We are educational leaders too, right? But I think of that. I think of those three positions, and I kind of get stuck in my head right away when someone asks me the top educational leaders, titles, roles that you can think of. I immediately go to school, principal, then I go up to superintendent, then I don't know why it's stratified to down. It should not be stratified down, but then I go down to teachers. But I think about all of them as educational leaders. And the truth is, we don't always immediately think about parents or guardians as educational leaders. When we talk about collaborating with educational leaders for the success of the students, we rarely think about parents and guardians. But I want to challenge us because, truth be told, parents, guardians, family members, they are the very first teachers of our students. They are their very first teachers. And if teachers are educational leaders, then that means that they are. Now, some of us may immediately start thinking, well, they're not really good teachers, so I wouldn't say they're very good educational. I'm not asking you to think of the most qualified, the most involved, the most, the highest, greatest educational leaders. I'm asking you to think of educational leaders. As leaders, we all have room to grow, but we all have leadership skills. And parents, whether they want to or not, they are educational leaders in our students' lives. They are the ones that our students go back to after they leave us also, and they're continually led and they're continually mentored. And sometimes that mentoring is not in the direction that we want it to be. It is not at the level we want it to be. But that does not negate the fact that parents, guardians, and family members who are taking care of our primary caregivers of our students, that they are the number one educational leaders in our students' lives. And so when we talk about the power of family engagement, we want to move away from involvement, and which is basically like a doing for. When you involve somebody, you like invite them in and you're doing for them, you're doing to them, they're a part of the equation. But family engagement is more of doing with. Okay. Okay, if any of you all are like me, you're probably thinking, who cares? And I have no problem with you asking that. Honestly, in fact, I encourage my students to challenge me, not necessarily in front of the entire class by saying, who cares? But in their head, I want them to continually ask themselves the question, who cares? Because if you cannot answer, as a student or someone who's listening and growing in, if you cannot answer that, then either you're not fully engaged or I am not being very clear in helping you to get to that answer to who cares. Now, who cares whether it's parental involvement or family engagement? Words are words, but I care and I want you to care because there is a difference. And if the difference today is not the same as it is 10 years from now, that doesn't matter. Today, this language that we're using is language that evokes understanding, and in understanding, it evokes behavior because it begins here first, and then we act out what begins here. And so engagement is about, when we think about engagement, we think about involving and interweaving, interlocking. And because of that, let's use the language nowadays that is going to help us. Reason why I want to take time in saying that is because our language is important. What I hope to accomplish over the next 20 minutes is to discuss what true family engagement looks like, to explore what key research findings say about the impact of engaging, not just involving, engaging families, to identify and discuss barriers. This is a big one because this is the answer to the why and the how we can overcome that. And then the last one is for us to have some actionable steps. The last thing I want us to do is to leave this Zoom, and we actually have just thought about some things, disagreed, agreed, and then logged off. I think our time is too valuable. We need to make sure that we're not just thinking about something, but that we are making a plan of action afterwards. If not, then the answer to that, who cares, has not been honored. Okay. But I want to challenge you. I want you to think of a time, and I'm going to ask you to talk. Think of a time when your efforts to engage with the student's parents or family made a significant difference in that student's life. Think of a time. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to think of that. All right. I'm going to start off, and then I'll ask somebody to join and share. If you don't mind, please. Um, when I think about a time when my efforts to engage with a student's family member made a significant difference in that student's life, I think of the first thing I think of, there are a number of them, but over the past 30 plus years, I think of a time when I was teaching sixth grade, and it was my very first year teaching. I had a student who was, I taught students with emotional behavioral disabilities in middle school and sixth grade. Can you imagine? And my little classroom was actually it used to be a custodian's closet. Literally, I'm not exaggerating. It was a custodian's closet. They turned it into a classroom for special education. And I had a student who had a hard time sitting still for longer than 5 minutes, was always touching people's everything, their property, their bodies, would leave the classroom. And he was not doing this just to be rude or disrespectful. He just had true ADHD. But then he also, that it was challenging for him to ever finish anything. And so he was having difficulty being successful at getting the grades he wanted, finishing his homework, actually sitting through a lesson and engaging with the lesson, and even developing friendships and following through on much of anything throughout the school day. I involved his grandmother. He lived with his grandmother. Um, and I involved his grandmother. And when I reached out to his grandmother was expressing how it was difficult in her old age. She was in her 70s at the time. It was difficult for her to even be able to get a rein on it. So long story short, we met and we collaborated. Hello. We we met and we collaborated and on what we can do. We had no answers, but we thought, okay, let's try this. I'll try this at school. You try this at home, and because the student knew that we were working together, I was working with his grandmother. He couldn't put on anything over us. We ended up being such a strong unit. That student to this day, that student to the day he died, he actually was shot and killed about 6 years ago. That student's twin sister still keeps in touch with me. But that student to the day he died continued to keep in touch with me and finished school, did well, went into the military. But it all began with the fact that I collaborated. And I'm not saying that my collaboration was the answer to um, all of his problems, but I do know for a fact that engaging with that parent made sure that it was a net. It was another connection on a net that made sure that he did not fall through the gaps. I would love to hear from someone else, and then we're going to jump into the next slide. Can you tell me another time?
I
Yeah.
can share an example that happened with my sister's the school counselor,
Mm-hmm.
and she speaks Spanish. That
Mm-hmm.
was actually one of the I think things that really helped her get one of her positions. And she used to work in a school in California where the population was about 40% Hispanic. And there were a couple parents that when she started working there, they started calling her for things, and they would be like, I'm so glad that there's somebody that speaks Spanish here. And she would talk to the teachers and they would be like, oh, that parent's not involved. They never come to anything. And she was like, I talk to that parent all the time. They just don't feel comfortable because there's nobody that speaks the language. So I thought that was really interesting how people think, oh, they don't care, they're not involved, but they just didn't feel comfortable. So
Karen, that is so good. I'm so glad that you mentioned it because because that's it. I want to talk about perception today of how we perceive and how that affects our behavior. Remember, I said a lot of times it begins here, and then our behavior is backing up the lens through which we see. Um, the question I want you to think about a time when I'm not going to ask for examples, but I just want you to imagine with me. Think about a time that you or your loved one was in the hospital and receiving medical care. And I've got one right now that's coming to mind. Um, there was a time when my 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 daughter was hospitalized, and my husband and I immediately got pulled in, like the very first day. Pulled in by the hospital nurse that was seeing to her, and also social worker. And they sat down and talked with me and my husband about the plan of care. They asked us questions and said, "Do we have any questions?" We got a chance to ask that. From that very first day, we felt like our daughter was going to have the best care. There was a time when my son was hospitalized. He was air flighted to a children's hospital. It was critical. We didn't know if he was going to live. Do you know that in that time, very few doctors talked to us, very few nurses talked to us. And in fact, they had doctors and practicing students in practice, in clinical practice coming in. So a drove of like 4, 5, 6 practicing students, and the doctor would come in while we're in there, and the doctors would talk to the students, but wouldn't address us. And then we're at a place where we were concerned and we were crying because we're not sure if our son is even going to make it. That was the worst experience I ever had. And both of them, no matter the however you triage the treatment, both of them are examples of the difference that parents feel when we engage or we don't engage with them. Um, that's a hospital, but we are a school, an institution also that is caring for other people's loved ones. And can you imagine the difference between? Now, I want to know, why in the world um, do we not engage with our parents? Like, where is the ball dropped? And the reason why I want to jump into this, I've jumped the slide because again, we already know the benefits, but what is the reason why we are not? Why are we not engaging with our parents? The truth is, there are things that get in the way, and the very first thing that gets in the way is our perception. Our perception, how we see a thing. What do I mean by that? Have you ever been with someone who has a habit of talking about people once they get up from the table and leave the room? You know that. You know that person who will be laughing with someone at the table, and once they get up, they kind of stare at that person as they walk out the room. And then you just kind of wait because you know they're going to have something to say. Right? So, knowing that, let's say there was a time that you got up and you walked maybe to the bathroom, walked to get something, but you know that you had left the table and you had this sense that that same person was saying something about you. Or how about this? Have you ever met a person, this happens a lot with us, who shared the same name as somebody that you know and love? Oh my gosh, you know a Kathy, you've loved a Kathy, and you met another Kathy, and they shared the same name. And with you don't even know who this new Kathy is, but because of that, you love that Kathy. You are very kind to that Kathy, and you're open to what Kathy has to say. Or maybe it's the person has the similar looks, or they may even just sound like somebody that you know and you love. And because every time they open their mouth, you're thinking of Bridget. Oh, I love Bridget. You sound like Bridget. You're thinking in my head. And so you've got this affinity towards this person that you have no idea who that person is, but there's something about them that reminds you of. Those things happen because we have perception through two E's, and that is expectations and experiences. For example, in that first have you ever situation, that was your expectation. You expected this person to talk about you. So you had this sense, whether it was true or not, you had this sense that it was going to happen. Whether it happened or not, you still behaved in your body, in your mind. You walked away, and your response in your body, viscerally, is this person is saying something about me. And you have no idea if that is the true situation. Or your experience in the second situation. You don't know the stranger, but that stranger named Kathy is shares the same name with your grandmother, who you love dearly. And because of that, you're giving Kathy a little bit more love than you would Karen, who is sitting next to Kathy. And you have no issue with Karen, but Kathy is named Kathy. Your experience with the Kathy was so positive. And so in your mind, your body, and in your actions, even in the way and the tone in which you speak to Kathy, there is a lightness. Why does Karen not get that same lightness? Karen didn't do anything to you, and Kathy doesn't even know you. But guys, we are human beings. And so as a human being, we have these biases, we have these tendencies, and we have these perceptions that dictate our behavior. And we're not always aware of that. I'm spending time talking to you about our perception because that is the number one barrier between parents engaging and families members engaging with schools and with school members engaging with families. It comes down to number one, and that is their expectation. Parents have an expectation going into school. If they've had um, um, uh, if they've had a good interaction with you, they're going to expect that type of interaction is going to continue to happen. That's their expectation. And it's interwoven with their experience. Experience goes a little bit broader too. If they've had poor experience with school faculty in that school, or even in a previous school, or even in their own childhood, then their experience is going to dictate their perception of school and how they're going to engage with school. We don't have to stop at that barrier. That is the first barrier. And then vice versa. Think about the same thing as especially as young teachers, but we're not young teachers. I'm sorry if anybody's offended, but I'm going to go ahead and just speak for us. We're not novice, brand new teachers, but yet we still have the fact that we are not brand new teachers means that we have more expectations and more experiences to battle and to deal with in our perception. And so it's an internal work that has to happen when we every single day engage with our students, engage with their families, whether we are working in PK through 12 or higher ed, we're engaging with somebody, and we need to make sure that we are internally checking our expectations and our experiences, because that's our number one barrier to what prevents us from engaging. And then we also need to use that as an understanding as to why others may be hesitant to engage with us. So what do? We change the expectation. We work towards changing the experiences that our families are holding of schools, okay? Other things that get in the way that are rooted in expectations and experiences. These other things are secondary. Primary is our perception. Everything else after that is birthed out of our perception, our experiences, and our expectations, okay? For example, our training to become educators most likely did not adequately prepare us for working with families. That's some of the reasons why it's a barrier, but that's our experience, okay? We've historically struggled with our own biases of working with families. That's our experiences and our expectations. Other barriers, parents and families have struggled. Again, that's the other side, their experiences and expectations. And lastly, these are the top four barriers. Oftentimes, there are negative assumptions from both sides, and fingers are pointed at each other to blame each other for the lack of student achievement, trying to find a reason why that is happening right now in the news. It's happening in litigation. It's happening in policies being passed. It's happening in communities and around tables and in meetings where we're not involved in. And because of that, that's expectations and experiences. Think about all of these four barriers, and think about how they all come back to our perception, and our perception are two E's: experiences and expectations. If you don't get anything out of this today, I really want you to walk away with the intentionality about doing an internal assessment on your expectations in a situation and your experiences, and how they're serving as the lens through which you behave, okay? How can we overcome that? How can you overcome those barriers? Think about that. How can we deal with that, even though that's the truth? Based on, I want you all to talk with me. How can we overcome something that we don't even know we're doing? How can we push past it? And again and again and again, because it's not a hurdle that you once you cross, you got it. It's gonna always be present because as long as you are human, as long as we are in situations of leadership, educational leadership, and as long as we are tasked with engaging families for positive impact for students, we're gonna always have this hurdle. How can we overcome that? What's one specific action you can take next month? I want you all to take about 30 seconds to think about this because I do want you to think about it and I do want you to respond. You can drop it in the chat or you can unmute, but take about 30 quiet seconds. It's not an easy one. Just saying, well, you know what? I'm going to, that's, I want to challenge you. That's good. I'm sure whatever it is you came up with, it's a step.
Are we
Okay.
dropping in the chat or are we just
You
talking?
can drop it in the chat. You can drop it in the chat or you can unmute.
Okay, so
Um,
mine, I can share mine. I work a lot with the related service providers.
uh-huh.
And what I like to have them do is create some, like when they're doing a lesson plan for their therapy session, create something that is scalable, that
Yeah.
you could create something that you could share with somebody else so you could coach them with, so that you could share this with a parent so they could do something with their kids at home so that you're having that when you're going into this session, you're thinking, how am I going to share this with somebody else? And I have them do that for teachers as well. But
So you have them prepare something that's going to help them to duplicate it or
mhm,
continue it on. And
yeah. So
right.
something shareable so that
Mm,
you can um, take what you're doing in therapy and make sure that the student has support in other places and that the other people that are supporting them have some kind of a tool they can use to do that. Because
okay.
that's one of the challenging things that therapists have with is carryover, and it's because there's not enough collaboration between them and the other people, teachers,
Aha.
parents, etc.
All right. So keyword is
Collaboration.
yes, that's it. That is it. Helping to continue that collaboration between the family and the school, finding ways to continue that collaboration. It can begin with you, but then how can it continue? And that's
And
great.
of course, you want to make sure that you have the parent involved in the conversation before the therapy session as well, obviously.
Okay, you say make sure you have them involved. And what if they are hesitant to get involved? What are some ways? This is not just for you, Karen, but that
Yeah.
is, this is for, what do you do with the hesitant family member?
I think you need to be aware of how do they like to communicate and receive information, because I don't know that well, I do know that it's not going to be the same for every family.
Mm-hmm.
I think figuring out what is the most comfortable way for them to even just physically come into the school building.
Yeah,
Like, do they want to come see their child participate in some kind of an event or
yes,
performance or a play or something like that? Are they going
yes.
to feel comfortable with this IEP meeting where everybody's sitting around the table and they're at the head of the table? I mean, so I think just being aware of that, if they're seeming hesitant,
Mm-hmm.
just figuring out different ways that they're more comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
maybe
And
having some different events
yeah.
with different context, just to notice how they're participating.
And you know that figuring that out does not have to be you too, Karen, right? That figuring out doesn't have to begin and end with you. It that figuring out can be as simple reaching out and asking them. You know, I know that you know that. I love talking to educators, veteran educators, because we know a lot of these things. But just because we know it doesn't mean we're always reminded to do them. So it's always good to talk about and to talk again and to make a plan. So that is great. Collaboration. And Erin, I haven't heard from you unless you dropped it in the chat.
I did. I just said listening more, letting them lead the discussion. I think a lot of times I know I have had like an agenda when parents
Mm-hmm,
come in of what we need to discuss and everything, but I also think it's important to really listen to what their needs and wants and feelings are,
mm-hmm,
so that we can work together to,
mm-hmm.
for the benefit of the child.
Yeah, yes. Listen, my goodness. But we're so busy.
Yes. And taking time, it's a slowing down, even giving the parent and guardian the message that they're welcome to the
Yes,
school.
yes.
You're a welcome participant in this journey with me, with you and your child. We are together. Well,
Mm-hmm,
so many times
mm-hmm,
parents don't feel welcome,
mm-hmm,
and it's truly like it just kind of closes the door almost immediately, when maybe down the road, after feeling unwelcome, somebody asks you to come and to a meeting, and why would I go to a meeting and I'm not really feeling comfortable that I'm welcome in this school
mm-hmm,
environment? So it can be actually not so hard. It can be
mm-hmm,
welcome parents,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
like a real big shift at welcome parents. But you're right, we're so busy. And when do we make time? And how do we really do this?
And but this is the thing, and again, we know to do this. We know the benefits of doing this. We've talked about the number one barrier. You said that, help them to feel welcome. Maybe they didn't feel welcome. That goes under experiences and expectations. And so their behavior and their hesitation may be as a result of it, it could have been vicariously. They know someone else who wasn't welcomed. And so there's a reputation now that they're behaving or responding from someone else's experience. You can't change anybody's perception. You cannot change it. Okay. But you can be aware of it and you can do things to help guide, but you cannot make somebody think differently. You can't make anybody do anything. You know that. If anybody is married, you know that. But you know what you can do to create the environment. And that's why I went back to this slide. I was going to skip it because we know these things, but just to remind ourselves, um, we can engage our families to help build collaboration. We talked about that. You talked about, Erin, the communication. Dr. Crowley, you talked about the compassion, the caring. These are reasons and ways. Like they are two. They are the why and they are the way to increase engagement. Why engage? So there can be better collaboration. So there can be better communication. Why engage the families? So we can create a culture, a shared culture, so we can create a community. Why engage? So that collective responsibility can increase. But also, how can we engage? Well, we can engage by making sure that there's collaboration. Karen talked about that. How can we? We can help to increase engagement and help to change someone's perception. We can't change it we can't have the control, but we can help to. And hopefully it does it. And that's increasing communication from the very beginning, positive, slowing down. We're so busy. My goodness. I have Dr. Gloria, who would have been here, she were not teaching right now. She shared with me, as we were preparing this, she shared with me a time where ooh, ooh, she called it, she said these kids were not disobedient. She was substituting. They were not disobedient, and they were not being what people would consider out of control. My research is in the area of problem behavior and our perception of problem behavior. So I'm always careful when I say problem behavior, because people's perception is different and it's not operationalized. But we get the idea. She says that this person was just buck. She called it buck. That means that they were all over the place, not to be disagreeable, but it ended up being disagreeable. And she found out the parent was just really done with the school and disengaged and with the school, because was tired of hearing all of the complaints. And so she reached out, and the parent got salty with her. And she was just like, at first she was just like, you know what? I know where this child gets it from. Instead of falling into that was her perception. And that was based on her experience and expectation. But she did the internal work to stop and say, okay, let me collaborate, let me communicate, let me extend some compassion, let me see if I can connect so we can increase this collective responsibility for what's going on in my classroom. And then with that culture is going to change, that the shared culture. But I have to first communicate. So she tried again, and she says, can we meet? She talked, and the parent was defensive at first, but then she listened and she allowed that parent to talk. As busy as she was, and she didn't have a lot of time, and that parent was not being very agreeable at the beginning, she still listened. And then once the parent got everything off her chest, she said, may I share with you my experience? Now, the parent cannot deny your experience. She can deny everything, or he or they can deny everything, but they can't deny your experience. So the Gloria said, can I share my experience with your child? This is what I've experienced. And the parent was just like, oh, I didn't know that. My daughter didn't tell me that. My daughter never said that. And but because the teacher stopped and listened, that parent now felt like, okay, my experience with this parent is that I'm heard, and then also that what I have to say is valued enough for your time, as busy as you are. So the parent then stopped and listened to the teacher and gave the teacher some credibility in their experience and said, okay, I believe what you're saying about my child is correct. Let's see what we can do to work together. And it was a lot better from that point forward. Even the student realized parent was connecting, and it helped to create collective responsibility. It helped create connection. It helped to build community. It helped it helped to change the culture of the classroom. And also there was care that is now the expectation between the two, increased communication, and they were more able to collaborate. All of that is involved. But remember I said, if you don't get anything out of what we're talking about today, I do want you to get this. What happened at the very beginning between both parties could have been a sticking point, a stopping point, and they were both responding at the very beginning from their perception. And that perception was based in their experiences and their expectation. They had to work and do the internal work to push past that. In our good work that we're doing every single day in the field of education, which is not easy, let's commit to doing that internal work, okay? And now that we know that we already know the importance of family engagement. Now we know that we can have an effect in increasing that engagement and the power of it. And we know the barriers to overcome. Let's work towards that. All right.
Wonderful. Yeah, Jamila. I would like to encourage you, Jamila, to get this on paper and put it out on put it out in the journal, Teaching Exceptional Children.
Teaching exceptional children.
Totally, Jamila. And you've done all the hard work and all the hard thinking. This would be a great professional contribution. This is the journal I'm thinking about here. It's it's published by CEC, and this is the March April 2024, and they've focused on transition. But yeah, teaching exceptional children, it's one of the and they still do it, in paper copy, which is rare these days because most of them
Yes, yes.
yeah, but
Oh,
this is a very, very important presentation. Um,
I
what,
appreciate that. Thank you for your time, you all. I appreciate that.
yeah,
Does anyone have any questions? Again, I want to acknowledge that we are all veteran educators. So, I know a lot is what you already know, but hopefully you've been challenged to do internal work to increase family engagement.
I just wanted to say thank you
Oh, you're
for
welcome.
this presentation today. It was like really a great eye-opening conversation for me. And while there's things that we already know, I think it's great to have these refreshers and just so condensed to remember the important aspects of it. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Erin, and thank you for hopping on. I am going to hop off to because I hear the graduates are upstairs now, marching in. So I'm going to hop off. But thank you, and I look forward to talking with you more. Dr. Crowley, anything you ask, I'm there. I love you.
Oh, thank you, Jamila, so very much for joining us and enjoy the graduation.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Erin, stay in touch with us, dear. Send me an email message or something. Do you have my email address at this
I
point?
do.
And
Yes,
you're in Wisconsin?
I am. I'm right over the border of Illinois into
Oh,
Wisconsin.
yeah. So you're kind of not kind of beyond Lake County or kind of southern.
Right.